Up one spot on the list from last year. It's 1206.
Welcome in, San Diego. It's Jade Hindman. On today's show, the arts and culture shaping San Diego right now. This is KPBS Midday Edition, connecting our communities through conversation. So local arts advocates are protesting a proposed city budget that would slash hundreds of programs. It would mean losing $11.8 million. That's 85% less than they received last year. Organizers from San Diego Comic-Con to cultural centers and museums will be affected. Additional cuts would also affect libraries, parks, and recreation programs. Joining me to talk about all of this is Alessandra Moctezuma. She's a professor of art, gallery director at San Diego Mesa College, and chair of the city's Volunteer Commission for Arts and Culture. Alessandra, welcome back to Midday.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So glad to have you here. I know we've had you on before to do weekend preview and things of that nature, but This is so interesting. Help me understand. I mean, what could these cuts mean for arts and culture nonprofits in San Diego?
These cuts are really disastrous for our arts ecosystem. The near $12 million that have been cut from the budget are the ones that support all of our organizations, big and small. So they are funds that go to museums, small arts nonprofits, festivals. And historically, we've had these funds available for the last 30 years. And even during the most difficult economic times after the 2008, economic crisis, in the pandemic, those funds have always stayed stable. So it was really surprising to us that decision was made. Also, these funds actually come from TOT, which is transient occupancy tax. So they're paid for through our tourist industry. And it's a very small percentage of those funds. We always call it, we're trying to work towards the penny for the arts, which would be 1 cent of that dollar. But in reality, we get a lot less than that. And so that's how consistently we funded the arts programs. So this is a cut to organizational support grants and also to community event grants.
Wow. I mean, so these cuts are pretty wide-ranging. Can you give me an example of some of the programs that are facing cuts right now?
Sure. So, for example, these cuts would affect organizations that are, big and small. So some of the major museums, San Diego Museum of Art, Museum of Contemporary Art, the Menge, all of them receive funds, but also the smaller museums, Chicano Park Museum, the Centro Cultural de la Raza, and also nonprofits that are engaged with the community. A lot of them focus, for example, on youth, like A Reason to Survive, the Asha projects, and also some of our festivals. So funds go to Comic-Con and they go to Pride. And so it's a pretty wide-ranging, and a lot of these organizations rely on these funds to operate, and many organizations have also been losing federal grants because of the current political climate in the federal government.
Right.
So there's been cuts to NEA, NEH, IMLS. So some of these grants that we offer, that the city offers, also help be matching grants for other things. So this could also mean that for some of the smaller organizations, they're actually not just losing the funds from the city, but they also might be losing a matching grant. And then other organizations that already lost, federal grants are now going to be losing also city grants. So it's pretty dire, and it's pretty, it's something that we were really also disappointed because we were just starting the funding we just had the applications out for this year. And this year we were planning to fund more organizations that we've ever had. So 229 organizations were going to be funded this year. And so now it's a waiting game, because now what we need to do is work with so the mayor has proposed this budget.
Right.
And so now what's happening is they're getting community input, and the city council is also going to come in and make some decisions. And then so we need people that value the arts to come out and speak, send letters to their council members, talk about the importance of the arts to their community.
Right, because like you said, this is a dire situation, especially for some of those smaller organizations, and many of which who are now just facing closure as a result.
Exactly, and I also want to emphasize that the money that goes into the arts is an investment. It doesn't just disappear. For example, if you think of the $300,000 that go to Comic-Con, Comic-Con actually generated $160 million for the local economy last year. So you're thinking 300,000 generates those $160 million. If you look at Pride got a similar amount, and the parade generated $30 million. And so on. There's so many other organizations whose programming actually reaches out to our city, to tourists, and so it's part of the growth of our economy. And if you told somebody, make an investment that's going to grow 100 times or 500 times, wouldn't you do that? And then the other thing is, you think historically, the government, has thought of funding the arts as an economic stimulus. So during the Great Depression, Roosevelt came up with the WPA program, and that was funding artists all over the country. And he did that to generate jobs, to beautify our cities, to provide hope and joy, but also definitely to stimulate the economy. Because, again, that money generates income for our city. So it doesn't make sense to cut it, because that means that we're going to have then, a loss.
Right. And, all of this, is interesting because, last fall, the city council actually voted not to cut funding for arts organizations. So I'm sure this all comes as a surprise for many. City leaders say, it is a tight budget year, though, nonetheless, and that certain programs must be cut. It's just about which ones, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think that you have to be mindful of a couple of things. And one of them is, what makes economic sense, right? If you're cutting something that is good for our economy, that kind of doesn't make sense. If you're cutting something that is providing essential services to our communities, because art is about creating empathy, engaging in social discourse and dialogue. It's healing. At the city council meeting last Monday, when the budget was presented, we had 180 people that spoke about the value of the arts, of parks and libraries. And a lot of them were young people from underrepresented neighborhoods. And so I think that there's this misconception that art is a luxury, and art is really has to be seen as something essential for our civic society. And so I think that a lot of people offered some suggestions. It is a difficult time for the budget, and there are a lot of funds that are restricted. So that's why they're trying to solve this by going into the unrestricted funds,
and
making those cuts. But I think, I don't know, maybe one solution would be to cut a smaller amount from different fund sources so that you can keep some of these other departments more whole,
right?
Because they're cutting what are the smallest, almost the smallest departments, like youth services, arts, parks and libraries.